Some seasons of television are shaped by vision. Season 4 of Miami Vice was shaped by panic. The show's most talked about storyline that year happened because an actress fell ill 3 days before filming began. The season's most bizarre episodes were written by a creative team, throwing ideas at a wall to see what stuck. And the budget cuts that defined the year's look and sound were handed down by a network that had already half given up. By the time production began in the summer of 1987, the show that had reinvented American television just 3 years earlier was operating without a safety net. The ratings had collapsed. The budget had been cut. The writer's room had turned over almost entirely. Michael Mann was gone in any meaningful sense. The mandate handed down from the network was as simple as it was impossible. Fix the show without breaking it further. What followed was a round of last-minute decisions, emergency replacements, and knee-jerk corrections to problems that were never fully understood. This is the story of a show adrift, and of the moments scattered across 22 episodes, where it half remembered what it was. By the time Season 3 ended, the numbers told a story nobody at NBC wanted to read. From a top 10 fixture in Season 2, peaking at 9th position, Miami Vice had slipped to the 26th place, boasting an audience share that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. From ratings glory to mid-20s mediocrity in a single season. The network's first instinct was to look for someone else to blame. Dallas was the obvious candidate. The scheduling shift from 10 p.m. to 9 p.m. had dropped Miami Vice directly into the path of CBS's long-running soap opera, and for a brief moment, that looked like a credible explanation. Except it wasn't. By 1986, Dallas was posting its lowest ratings in 6 years, hardly the juggernaut capable of kneecapping a show in its prime. The two series drew fundamentally different audiences, and Miami Vice had already seen off Falcon Crest, a similarly glossy nighttime drama, during its first 2 seasons without breaking a sweat. To put it simply, Miami Vice's decline was one of the few things that couldn't be pinned down on good old J.R. Ewing. The real explanation was closer to home. Dick Wolf's creative shift had earned somewhat of a critical praise. Reviewers responded to the darker tone, the psychological depth, the willingness to trade flash for weight. Episodes like Down for the Count and Shadow in the Dark drew raves for Don Johnson's intensity. Prestige, it seemed, was still somewhat intact. But audiences were telling a different story. The viewers who had fallen for pastel suits, pop soundtracks, and the cool geometry of Crockett and Tubbs found something harder and more demanding in their place. The novelty that had made Miami Vice essential viewing had been deliberately dismantled. And the alternatives were multiplying. L.A. Law arrived with the exact kind of sharp contemporary drama the audience had been looking for. The landscape was shifting. Hill Street Blues, the show that had quietly cleared the path for Miami Vice in the first place, aired its final episode in May 1987. Magnum P.I. and Cagney and Lacey were entering their last seasons. The era that had produced Miami Vice was closing. The show had changed for an audience that was already moving on. NBC understood this. Executives weren't under any illusion that Wolf's experiment had succeeded on the terms they'd hoped. But cancellation wasn't straightforward either. Miami Vice remained a prestige anchor. Culturally significant, internationally valuable, especially in Europe, and profitable enough in syndication to justify one more run. Killing a signature show risked signaling weakness at the very moment the network was riding high as the #1 channel in the United States. The calculation was simple. Give the new tone one more season to find its footing. But that calculation came with conditions. The exorbitant budgets that had defined Miami Vice from the beginning were no longer sustainable at reduced ratings. NBC moved quickly. A containment and efficiency strategy was put in place. And one of the first casualties was the element that had done more than anything else to define the show's identity: the soundtrack. The economy shows up immediately in Season 4. The number of licensed tracks per episode dropped sharply. The entry Hell Hath No Fury features exactly 0 songs by popular artists, something that would have been unthinkable in Season 1. Even original score cues began to be recycled. The music that had once functioned as narrative architecture was now being rationed, like a luxury the show could no longer afford. It was a bad omen, and season 4 hadn't even aired yet. As was already mentioned, the 4th run of the show arrived with a simple brief and an impossible mandate: repair and maintenance without additional deterioration. The result was a season that couldn't decide what it wanted to be, and tried to be all of it at once. Darker than season 1, less expansive than season 2, lighter than season 3, more grounded than all of the 3. The pastel palette crept back, music diversified. The tone lurched between psychological cop drama and outright absurdism. Season 4 is the only chapter of the Miami Vice history that feels genuinely bipolar. A show simultaneously trying to recover its past, honor its recent present, and invent a new future, all within the same 22 episodes. The visual corrections came first. Tubbs started to sport a beard. Crockett ditched the Persol 69 2018s he'd worn through season 3 and returned to his Ray-Ban Wayfarers, a small detail that functioned as a public apology to the audience. But the surface changes masked deeper fractures. The series that had once felt like it owned Miami now felt like it was borrowing it by the hour. Season 4 retreated indoors. Warehouse standoffs, interrogation rooms, backlot streets dressed to pass as exteriors. The result was a claustrophobia that earlier seasons had never known. Miami Vice had always used space as language. When the space contracted, something essential left with it. Behind the camera, the unified voice that had shaped the show from the beginning was gone. The series had survived the departure of Anthony Yerkovich early in season 1. Instead, it relied on Michael Mann. But by now, Mann's presence had become supervisory at best. By season 4, the writing staff had turned over almost entirely. Freelancers cycling through, each bringing different instincts, different tones, different ideas about what the show was supposed to be. Dick Wolf, now elevated to co-executive producer, wrote 5 episodes himself. The show that had once operated with the discipline of a single authorial vision was now assembling itself week by week from whatever was available. Composer Jan Hammer felt the strain too. John Peterson took over much of the weekly scoring workload, with Hammer's original cues frequently recycled rather than replaced. The music that had once been part of the narrative architecture was now managed like a budget line. The composer left the show at the season's end and never came back. And then there were the novelty grenades. With ratings sliding and the show's identity fractured, Wolf's response was to reach for shock over craft. High-concept premises designed to recapture the audience's attention through sheer strangeness. The episode The Cows of October centers on a stolen canister of bull semen from a prized miniature bull named Gargantua, with the Vice Squad entangled in a bidding war between a shady rancher, an FBI agent, a Cuban spy, and the ever-hustling Easy Moreno. The entry The Big Thaw finds Crockett and Tubbs mediating over the cryogenically preserved body of a reggae legend, with a half-defrosted corpse eventually floating away across Biscayne Bay after a shootout. And then there's the infamous entry Missing Hours, which sends Trudy into an alien abduction storyline. Essentially the X-Files 7 years early, grafted onto a gritty cop drama that had no idea what to do with it. Fans and critics alike rated these among the worst episodes in the show's entire run. And they were right. These weren't creative risks, they were desperate ones. A show that had once surprised audiences by being better than expected, now attempting to surprise them by being stranger than imaginable. The distance between these two things is the distance between season 1 and season 4. The compass was gone, and everyone could see it. If season 3 belonged to Dick Wolf, season 4 belonged to the usual suspect Sonny Crockett. Not by design, but by default. The series opens with Crockett in prison, framed, incarcerated, fighting to clear his name before the case collapses around him. It's a strong premiere, but it sets a template the season never quite escapes. Season 4 is, above everything else, a Crockett showcase. His guilt, his grief, his marriages, his identity, and his near death. The ensemble that had given the show its texture retreats to the margins. Tubbs slips back into the role of reaction shot and back up. Philip Michael Thomas's character went from being an engine to a hood ornament. But there were still some exceptions that elevated his character. In the entry A Man Send Money, an episode that worked precisely because it removed Crockett entirely and let Tubbs drive the investigation from start to finish. The fact that it stands out is the problem. It should have been the norm. Balanced. The show knew this was a problem too. Another highlight is Indian Wars, an episode that lets Tubbs drive a complex weapons smuggling investigation without the help of his partner. But these two remain exceptions. The season keeps pulling back to Sonny. In the episode Child's Play, Crockett fires through a wall during a surveillance operation and hits a 13-year-old boy who had grabbed the gun believing his mother was in danger. The boy survives. Crockett does not easily recover. He hadn't seen his son Billy in 3 years. The shooting forces the reunion. Castillo's verdict is delivered in typical fashion. You pulled the trigger, and I'll live with the responsibility. It's an episode that deserves to be better known. The guest casting confirmed the show's ambition hadn't left the building. James Brown as a forum spokesperson on Alien Contact, Brian Dennehy as a televangelist, Arlie Ermey as a Metro Date detective, Frank Stallone as a henchman, Ben Stiller and Chris Rock in early appearances. Future Oscar winners Chris Cooper and Julia Roberts are also present. The talent arriving at the door remained extraordinary. What greeted them on the other side was increasingly uncertain. But the season's most divisive guest casting had to be Sheena Easton. The role she played, Caitlin Davis, was not written for her. It had been created for Lorraine Bracco, at the time in a relationship with actor Edward James Olmos, who withdrew due to illness days before filming began. Easton was the emergency replacement, and her casting changed everything. Not the performance, which Easton delivered as well as the material allowed, but the pacing. Meet, fall in love, married, all within 5 episodes. The Bodyguard wouldn't reach cinemas until 1992, but Miami Vice had already filmed the template 4 years earlier. The art gave season 4 a brief ratings boost, but it didn't hold. The chemistry was never fully convincing. The marriage felt rushed, and the soap opera plotting sat uneasily against a crime drama trying to reassert itself around it. And then Caitlin was murdered in Deliver Us from Evil. Shot by a former nemesis, Crockett had, in an earlier moment of moral ambiguity, helped escape execution. Crockett later learned that she had been 7 weeks pregnant. The show didn't linger on it. No big funeral, no expansive memorial. The house they'd shared disappeared from the narrative without explanation. In the remaining episodes, Caitlin was simply gone. Between the accidental shooting of a child, a rushed marriage, a murdered pregnant wife, and a clip show in which Crockett fights for his life whilst his team reminisces about him, Season 4 had essentially turned Miami Vice into a one-man soap opera. Given the show was competing against Dallas at the time, one could argue it was simply playing the competition at their own game, though Dallas, to its credit, had the decency to spread the melodrama across an entire cast. The 4th run of Miami Vice is not an easy one to defend. Dick Wolf and the creative team threw everything at the show in decline. Genre experiments, soap opera arcs, novelty premises, tonal reversals. And in the process, lost sight of what had made the show genuinely distinctive. But even here, in the lowest chapter of Miami Vice's run, the spark hadn't fully died. The following 5 episodes are the proof. Moments where the craft reasserted itself despite everything working against it. At number 5, we find Death and the Lady. In this episode, Crockett becomes convinced that a killing stage in a pornographic film was real. Not performance, not art, but murder dressed up as exploitation. The director, Milton Glantz, is the kind of villain Miami Vice did well. Not physically threatening, but morally corrosive. A man who understands exactly how far he can push before the law catches up. What makes this episode work is its patience. The case doesn't close cleanly. The evidence is circumstantial. Glance walks, and Crockett is left with the knowledge that he was right, and the system wasn't built to care. Vet for the Insane by Fields of the Nephilism plays over the opening sequence as a snuff film is screened at an erotic film festival. The song's dark energy sets the moral tone immediately. What the audience is watching is wrong. The music knows it before Crockett does. Following up at number 4, The Rising Sun of Death. The Vice Squad's investigation of a murder connected to a Yakuza prostitution ring is complicated by the arrival of a former Japanese detective, played with quiet intensity by Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa. He isn't there to assist. He's there for revenge, and he doesn't care who gets in the way. The episode works because it resists easy moral positioning. The tension between justice and law drives it without ever resolving it cleanly. Yellow's Moon on Ice scores the club sequences, atmospheric, slightly sinister, a reminder of what the show's musical instincts were capable of when budget allowed. At number 3 is an episode already discussed in this segment, A Man, Send Money. This chapter features 2 feuding televangelists who are operating a fraud empire dressed in the language of salvation. When one of them frames Stubbs for raping a parishioner, the episode becomes a study in how power protects itself. This is Ricardo Tubbs at its best. Driving an investigation with focus and control, the New York hustle against the evangelical empire, which seems like a natural match. Satellite by the Hooters scores one of the key scenes. Televangelism was one of the defining frauds of the 1980s. Miami Vice was exactly the right show to puncture it. The runner-up position is taken by Blood and Roses. Stanley Tucci returns as Frank Mosca for the second time this season. A mobster with enough charm to be genuinely dangerous. Sheena goes undercover, and the assignment becomes complicated when she falls for him. Crockett and Tubbs racing to reach her in time is the season's most urgent sequence, set to Tommy Shaw's Dangerous Game. The song doesn't comment on the action, it drives it. Season 4 could use more moments like this. And finally topping this list is the episode Mirror Image. Crockett is caught in a boat explosion whilst undercover. When he surfaces, his memory is gone. He believes he is Sonny Burnett, the drug dealer alter ego he had inhabited for years, and goes to work for the very man he was investigating. Where the novelty grenades reached for strangeness as a substitute for meaning, Mirror Image uses its high concept to ask the question the entire series had been circling since episode 1. Who is Sonny Crockett really? After years of living as someone else, after a dead wife, and a war that can't be won, how much of the man remains beneath the cover? Tangerine Dream's Alpha Centauri accompanies the dream sequence. Haunting, spacious, unhurried. Once again, the music doesn't explain what's happening. It simply inhabits it. The season ends on Miami Vice's only true cliffhanger. Crockett is still Burnett. The amnesia arc carries into season 5. The second to last run of Miami Vice doesn't fail cleanly. What it represents is something more complicated. A show that lost its way whilst trying to fight it again. Changed too much, tried to change back, then changed into something else entirely, all within the same year. By the end of season 4, the decade that had created Miami Vice, the neon excess, the cocaine economy, the MTV aesthetics, the Reagan-era glamour and dread, was entering its final chapter. The cultural moment that had made the show feel essential was closing, and the series that had defined that moment was still trying to survive inside it. Season 5 would be the show's last. It would inherit an identity crisis it hadn't caused, a lead character operating as someone else, and a television landscape that had moved decisively on. The question now wasn't whether Miami Vice could reinvent itself one more time. The question was whether there was anything left worth saving.